Um,
I don't know why it's doing that.
okay, so we have to, don't show me. Okay, so we just say, okay. So we're being recorded. It's 7, so let me get going so Dan can get started on a little business. And if I can get this to work, I'll do the introduction. Uh, so tell me if I have the right. Is that showing the full picture?
No, it's doing the slide,
Let
the
me get the
presenter's view.
front of this. Okay, so you can see the whole slide. Well, thank you, Matt. And Matt's
No,
our
Dale, it's the presenter view. It's not the full slide.
okay. So I'm going to switch here. How's that?
There you
There
go.
you go.
That's what we want. Okay.
Yep, looks good.
This is our 20th PNWAS Zoom meeting. And because of that, we've been able to bring in people from New York, like with Liz's program, Audrey Lynn, and we'll be bringing in, and Liz from Canada, and we'll have a speaker from Canada next time. And we're bringing in a speaker from Australia, which will be the next day for them. But we're really excited about this program with Dan, and it'll be basically on Dentalium shell brooms and spears, but also herring rakes, two important pieces. One for money, Dentalium tooth shells, and herring is right up there with salmon on the coast. It's a very important fisheries. This is his 8th presentation with us, and so we really appreciate that. Over 30 years of that. And here's some of the tooth shells and use of a herring rake. Sam Johnson commissioned Dan to make these for this new exhibit coming up. And it's it's advertised here starting the 1st of November. You may want to go down to the Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria for the opening of this. And here's Sam, who commissioned Dan with a scale copper herring. We also, Dan will talk about this too, but you heard our talk from Ed and I. We're moving along on this book on living off the land and ocean by Ed and I, and the first half of his life. But you can see one of his herring rakes, and he used stainless steel needles he got from the Keyport submarine base where he was a machinist. Pretty proud of those needles because they hold up so well. Uh, Here's a beautiful drawing of it's actually a painting of a herring, small fish, and I got him these rubber herring from Amazon. Uh, Next talk will be again from Canada by Dr. Duncan McLaren on some real exciting work and in a frozen site. These ice patch work he's doing in central BC, where up to 7,000-year-old perishables, including leather, obsidian that you can't believe because this was why they were there. It was such a good source for obsidian. And these are actually leather bound sticks and things of that nature. So he'll catch us up on what they're doing on that ice patch. You got this kind of perishable preservation in waterlogged sites you've seen a lot with the wet sites and the mud bay that Dale worked on with us, and then you have very dry site, arid sites, which are in rock shelters, say, are very arid, and they preserve perishables, as well as ice. So you have that 3 kind of sites: ice, frozen sites, and that's what he'll be talking about from Canada. And then our spring talk is by a real renowned archaeologist, Dr. Peter Bellwood from Australia. And he put together the whole story really in a new book. And it's the 5 million year odyssey, the human journey from ape to agriculture to our going to Mars, really. But if you can, I would strongly recommend you get Peter's book so we can discuss it. It'll be more of a conversational talk with him from Australia. For him, it'll be Friday at 11:30 in the afternoon, but comfortable for Peter. And so if you can get that and take a look at it, it would help us to ask him questions, anything you want to ask him. And he really does a Pacific perspective. He's right there in Australia. He's always looked at the Pacific area in terms of hominids, early pre-humans, movement into those parts of the world by the first modern humans into Australia, and then does a real good job on movement into the Americas, again from a Pacific perspective, and then right into the movement of both DNA and language and archaeological evidence in developing movements of people across the continent, and particularly the old world and development there. So do try to look this up. And I got it on Kindle and I'm enjoying reading it. It's well done and not too much jargon for sure. I mean, it's his ideas. I'm sure he's taken his years of teaching world prehistory and publishing it here. So very good book. So excited to have him. He first got involved with PNWAS in 1989 when we had the Circum-Pacific Prehistory Conference at the Seattle Center. PNWAS were the volunteers that made that international conference happen for our state centennial. And that's the first time Peter and I had any contact. He came over and gave a talk in 1989 and really enjoyed the conference. And a lot of that has to do with the PNWAS volunteers. Dan has, like I said, had many contributions with us. He did his first field work in Canada, University of Calgary in 72. He got his BA from Boise State University, a lot of time in Idaho. Got his MA in 1990 from Idaho State University. 31 years with the with Washington State Parks, 31 years. And that's
Wow.
a lot of us know him best. And he also worked as a contract archaeologist with both WSU and UW, and a highway archaeologist, just like David Munsell started in. He did that in the 70s and early 80s with the highway archaeologist for Idaho Department of Transportation. But look at what he's done here. He 1995 US West Auditorium, when we were there, the lime kilns and basically in the San Juan Islands. It was the best deposit of lime. Pringle might know something about that, but you need lime to make concrete. And that's one of our best deposits were found in the San Juans. Probably why we had the pig war. We wanted the lime off those islands to make the concrete that built San Francisco. A lot of this went to San Francisco as well as Seattle. I think that's right, Dan. And East Wenatchee, a lot of involvement in the interpretation of the East Wenatchee Clovis site, again at US West Auditorium, 2008. Clovis exploring these mammoth hunters across the Northwest. And we had moved to REI Auditorium, understanding prehistoric technology, which we will hear today, and he's really well known for. He's done lots of talks in places like the Burke on this, Archaeology Day and otherwise. But then we had a workshop at Mountaineers on making flake stones for gifts in 2013. We talked about, and then he gave a talk. He does this too worldwide, Paleolithic spread of humans around the world in 2014. And that's kind of like what Peter Bellwood's trying to do with the whole human picture. And then we did find that in 2014, he did this workshop at Matt Barkley's house, our president, who's kind of managing our Zoom network. And here's some pictures of us back then. You can see Jan right there, I'm pretty sure. Is that you, Jan? And Carl. I think that's you. And you know, you can see Mick Carter and our youngest member, Julian. I don't know if Mick's here. Vern Hodgson. Here's Bill Guy, and Sanita, his partner here. And that's what Matt was talking about. This we were all around trying to make our Adalos on this one machine, I guess. You want to add anything to that, Matt?
No, it was definitely fun.
And we'll see some action here. We're trying to keep Julian away from these because this is like shooting 357 Magnums. But we got some people that were pretty good at this. This is us trying them.
Whoa.
This gal, who is this, Matt? Is this a neighbor?
No, it was somebody through PNWAS.
Oh, okay. Good. But she has real good form, but you can hear the dart come out of her Adelo hook. You heard that? Yeah. So if she really kept it in the hook, it would have gone a long ways. But that was a great workshop. So we're really happy to introduce Dan here and have this presentation. He'll show you some amazing use of Dentalium, these tooth shell in making amazing, you know, capes and earrings and other things that are the wealth. Anything that's a blanket of any sort, particularly if it's covered with Dentalium, is the wealth, as Liz knows, you know, like the dog hair, or for that matter, the duck down blankets that were pretty common at OZ. All right, well, thank you, Dan. If you want to come in now, I will stop sharing here, and we'll have his presentation of his PowerPoint.
This wonderful food and this wonderful.
You want to start with that, Dan?
Share. Amen.
Amen. Okay,
Share.
now can
Oh, okay.
There we go. Did that?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Can everybody see that full screen?
Yes.
Good.
Does that look good? Well, thank you, Dale. I'll
thank you.
hopefully you can see this. Thank you, and I guess welcome everyone, and good evening. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to
Archaeologist.
come hear this talk. I'm going to try and stay on time. I'll try to keep this to about an hour. My intent is to run through a few slides and give you some background and kind of illustrate
Great, thank you so much.
technology, and also a little bit of background information about Dentalium shells. Then what I want to do is kind of cut off the PowerPoint demonstration and show you some replicas. I've got a few here. These were part of a project that we did for the Columbia, as Dale was saying, with the Columbia River Maritime Museum.
Let me just jump in here. Please mute your system so we don't hear background noise. And secondly, Dan, you have as much time as you want.
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to respect everybody's.
Yeah, but hours fine. Great.
We'll probably answer questions afterwards. The other thing I wanted to add to this, and Dale mentioned this as well, is one of the other things that we were working on for the museum was herring rakes. And so Dale's asked me to kind of insert a little bit of time and a few pictures here at the end to kind of show some of our work and talk a little bit about herring rakes. So kind of two agendas here, if you will. Finally, just a quick side note here. I've tried to use a lot of different pictures from a variety of people and illustrations as well. And I've tried to make the best effort I can at trying to give credit and recognize other people's work. So hopefully we've captured that in all of these photographs. That information is there too, in case people are interested in a particular picture. So with that, how this all started was roughly 2 years ago. The director of the Columbia River Maritime Museum, Sam Johnson, approached myself and my colleague, Jim Woods, who's the former director of the Herritt Museum in Southern Idaho. And he approached us with a request. He was looking to add a few items to an exhibit that they were developing. It's called Cedar in the Sea, and its focus is on maritime culture of the Pacific Northwest, specifically looking at a lot of fishing technology and a lot of related items and material, and, if you will, tools that go with that. They gave us a short list, and we made a few items, not a lot. And as in the course of doing that, they also inquired about a few other items, and this is where the Dentalium broom came up. And I guess I should begin by saying, what's a Dentalium broom? Well, Dentalium shells are these small little tusk-like shells that you see in a lot of archaeological sites and a lot of traditional tribal clothing. And they're kind of fascinating because it requires a certain kind of specific technology to obtain them. You can find them on beaches, of course, but their habitat is actually quite deep in the water. So a few tribes here on the coast have developed some really interesting technology. It's called a broom, or a Dentalium broom, and it's used to kind of plumb the depths of the deep waters in order to extract these Dentalium shells. So what I want to talk about first is perhaps the significance of these shells and their role in traditional cultures here. What you're looking at is 3 beautiful Dentalium shell capes. These women, I believe, are Lakota, and they are wearing just absolutely stunning shell capes. These are all Dentalium shells, probably on the order of
from California.
many hundreds, not thousands of shells. They are laid up on what I believe is probably either a leather or a blanket cape that's been cut out to form. And then each Dentalium shell is stitched to it, hand stitched, and arranged in a very interesting pattern that creates this kind of 3-dimensional appearance, almost like roof shingles. They're kind of laying, they give the appearance of laying over each other and kind of washing down over the side. You'll notice, if you look closely, each cape is fringed with trade beads, shells, and the like, just creating a beautiful.
Is that what that was?
And these capes have a certain amount of antiquity. They've been around quite some time, but more importantly, they demonstrate the value and the significance of Dentalium shells, a value and significance that reached as far as the high plains in the Midwest. On the right-hand side, you've got a number of examples of Dentalium shells. On average, most of the Dentalium shells come in at around 2 inches in length. Sometimes they exceed 3 inches. Sometimes they're smaller, but on average, they're usually roughly about 2 inches in length. These Dentalium shells during kind of contact times had a number of different names. The most common name, a tribal name for them, was Haikwa. There's a couple of different spellings of that. But the fur traders that came in, both the maritime fur trade as well as the interior trade in beavers. Both of those kind of identified them and called them just tusk shells or horn shells, simply because of the shape and the way that it was evocative of an elephant's tusk. This map shows just how popular and how widespread those shells are. You can see that they extended from Alaska to Baja, all the way through the plateau and Great Basin, and even kind of squeezed out into the high plains, going as far as the Great Lakes region. Now, they're also found on the eastern seaboard, but this is kind of a different trade, which is a coastal or Atlantic trade of Dentalium, different species that are indigenous to the Atlantic coast and seaboard. So there's also a problem with this too, I should add, in terms of the identification of these shells in terms of their species, and that is many of these recovered from both historic and prehistoric archaeological sites are usually damaged and battered. You know, they're missing pieces, they're broken, they're worn. Sometimes they've been carved and decorated. And what that means is that a lot of the landmarks for identification are missing or absent. So it's rare that we're able to assign a specific species to these, but more often we'll just simply refer to these as Dentalium without getting into a specific species identification. Well, what I want to do now is talk about the significance of these shells. What is their significance? What roles do they play in traditional societies? Well, the first one and the most obvious one is decorations, is jewelry. And these are two wonderful examples of that. On the left are a pair of earrings. That beautiful round disc is abalone, and it's got a perforation in the middle, and then through it has been threaded sinew, which allows to have a series of bangles, 3 Dentalium shells, and then a smaller thin piece of abalone to serve as decoration. These things, I have to highlight and point out that these things, you have to envision these being worn during the day. One of the interesting things about abalone is that it has an inner layer called a nacre, and that nacre is chatoyant. That means it reflects light. So you get not only a reflective quality to earrings like this, but you also get just a kaleidoscope of colors depending upon how you move. And you can kind of see that both in the one piece, long, slender piece on the right earring, and you can also see it in some of the banding of the abalone. So these earrings really stand out visually, just as jewelry. On the right is another typical and common piece of jewelry, which is a necklace. And it's kind of made in an interesting fashion. 2 Dentalium shells are put together and then stitched and then separated by a single bead. And then the pattern is repeated all the way around twice. So you have a really interesting decorative and again, a very visually stunning, I would say, necklace made of Dentalium shell. Here's another example of Dentalium as a decoration, this time on clothing. This is called a cape dress. And just like the earlier short capes that I showed you that were made of thousands of Dentalium shells, again, we have the cape, again made of Dentalium shells, again, hand stitched on each one. But also notice that they have also used Dentalium as little design elements, both on the sleeves and at the base of the dress. So little flower or star-like patterns are created by rearranging these Dentalium shells into some kind of interesting patterns. The dress itself is probably a trade blanket. Trade blankets, these were wool, heavy wool trade blankets, very warm, and most often dark blue, although other colors circulated around. But you can see that, you know, the selection of white on this blue background is just visually stunning. More importantly, You also see another aspect of Dentalium shells, which is wealth. This dress is a display of wealth. This is a tremendous amount of shells to be accumulated, especially on the high plains, a great distance from the west coast of the US, where these shells are originating from. So this isn't just the beauty of jewelry and decorative clothing, it's also the display of wealth, and Dentalium figure greatly in that. Here's yet another example of not so much jewelry. This is a bridal veil. It's a historic bridal veil from Tlingit. And again, you can see the use of Dentalium as a decorative motif. Again, these little spacers, again, using historic trade beads. These are blue glass beads. And you also see little pieces of red felt, or maybe even part of a blanket that has been cut into long strip and then put a highlight of a different color and used to space and help organize and arrange all of these Dentalium shells. Note too, if you look at the top, you'll see that giving the entire veil structure is that there's a leather cap underneath. So all these Dentalium on top have been hand stitched to that cap, which gives it form and that allows all of the draping Dentalium to hang all the way around the sides. I mean, it's truly a stunning artifact, but it's also, I guess, some insight into the ceremonial value of Dentalium and their role and placement and display in ceremonies. In this case, likely a historic wedding. So one more aspect, one more facet, if you will, to Dentalium, and this became especially noteworthy at contact times, and that was Dentalium as money. The fur traders, both maritime and interior traders, recognized that local Indians valued Dentalium, and they sought quickly to kind of capitalize on it. And in a very short period of time, Dentalium kind of became a de facto currency of sorts. And so it was ordinarily organized into long strands, not necessarily necklaces, but these long strands served their purpose in trade and exchange, either for beaver or sea otter skins or other items as well. So you had this kind of cross-cultural economy that arose as a result of the fur trade, and the Dentalium was central as the means of exchange cross-culturally between these kind of two groups. As a measure of that, the gentleman down in the lower right-hand corner is a Hoopa from Northern California. His name's McCann. And what he is doing is measuring Dentalium against a tattoo on his forearm. And this was quite common to have tattoos, again, during the fur trade, especially, but you would put a tattoo, a long linear tattoo down the length of your forearm, and that would be the measure stick for deciding how much you're going to pay in Dentalium. So what he's doing is taking a strand, laying across his forearm, and measuring it against the tattoo, the permanent measuring stick, if you will, to establish the value. So the point here is that Dentalium fits into tribal society in many different facets. It has kind of a straightforward, it serves as a decorative item in terms of jewelry, clothing, and the like. But it also has a ceremonial facet. You see it with the wedding dresses and the headdress. And you see the economic side of it here as well, which is in trade, especially during the advent of the fur trade here in the Pacific Northwest. So Briefly, let me tell you a little bit about Dentalium, their habitat and biology. I'm not a biologist, so I will keep it short and sweet here. But there are a couple things and a couple characteristics that I think are important and relevant to the harvesting of Dentalium. They are considered, if I'm not mistaken, scaphoids. So they're, an ocean mollusk that frequents waters, the west coast of the Western Hemisphere here, as well as in many parts of the rest of the world. Sorry there. Australia, parts of the Mediterranean, the Atlantic coast here, and Southeast Asia. So it's a widespread shell and has a role in a lot of societies around the world. They have a little inside the shell is a little mollusk, and not unlike a land snail. They have a foot, which allows them to move around. You could see that on the right. And this foot kind of comes out and they kind of pull themselves across the seabed. Their preferred habitat is sandy bottoms or even muddy deposits on the ocean floor. And then they crawl around, excuse you, bless you. They crawl around and they burrow, and they have little tendrils. They're kind of tendril-like structures surrounding the foot, and they're called captacula, if I can get that out correctly. And these little captacula kind of reach out, and they're like little feeders. So essentially, this foot drags the Dentalium around. Sometimes they will burrow to seek out food. And then these little captacula will reach out and bring in organics, foraminifera, all sorts of things to feed on. So this is just a closer look at these captacula, the little tendrils. So as I said, their habitat are these sandy, muddy bottoms. Here on the West Coast, worldwide, we've got about 50 species. 19 of those species can be found here on the West Coast. Now, a lot of their habitat ranges is quite great. It can be from 2 meters of water to over 2,000 feet. So, or excuse me, 2,000 meters. So there's a lot of variety there. We can kind of reduce our attention down to really 2 primary species. One is called Protosium, and the other one is called Neohexagonum. And these 2 species have a very limited water depth, which makes them accessible for people to collect. Protosium is roughly 2 to 146 meters, and Neohexagonum is about 2 to 250 meters. What that means in terms of collecting these is, yes, you can collect them on the shore, wait for low tide, and the tide will bring in and deposit these dead Dentalium shells. But the problem with that, perhaps best exemplified by those cape dresses and short shawl-like capes, is when it comes to collecting hundreds, if not thousands of these, you need to get into the greater depths of the water to really collect these in bulk. You can't rely on them just washing up. It just doesn't work that way. So the one of these 2 species, the one that is primarily the one that we see in most archaeological sites in the Pacific Northwest, is the Protosium. It has a much greater distribution from Alaska all the way down to Baja. Neohexagonum is a little bit more restricted, more of a southerly, and so from Central California on down to Baja. But we do see examples of these in Western archaeological sites. But the important point here is the depth and the habitat of these shells. It's not that you can simply collect. you need a tool to get into these greater depths of water to reach these shells. And that's kind of the focus of tonight is you need a broom. These tools are called Dentalium brooms. And they're simply a device for grasping these shells in deep water. And this illustration, I think, kind of gets the gist of the way that these tools operate. They're from a canoe, and you have the actual device, which is a series of wooden slats. In this particular case, it's 4 slats that surround a bundle of very narrow, small, slender splints. And these splints are the real heart of the tool that does the collecting. So this tool is lowered down, you add extensions to it, and you can put that down and seat it into the seabed and literally push it down a bit, which is why the outer splints are tapered. They kind of seat the broom into the sand bed or the mud bed, and then those little splines go in as well. And the idea here behind this tool is you're hoping that these splines will pinch some dentalium in those sands and wedge them into those splines, and then you pull the device back up and empty it, hopefully successfully, in the canoe. So where is this technology? Well, interestingly, it's quite restricted. The two, actually several places that we see it, but the two that I'm going to talk about tonight are the west coast of Vancouver and the northwest corner of the Olympic Peninsula, especially around Ozette and Meatte. Now, there are also, these tools are also in use around the Queen Charlotte Islands and also a few other places farther north. We have some evidence, not a lot of details, but it also appears that there's kind of a more simplified Dentalium broom in use in central and northern California as well. But I'll try to restrict my comments to just these 2 locations here, and the examples will come from primarily Vancouver Island. So I want to segue for a moment and make an analogy here, because I think it's a relevant one, and I think it's an important one. This is a picture out of a fantastic book called Indian Fishing by the late Hilary Stewart. She did so much to interpret traditional activities like fishing, Indian artifacts, and the like. Her illustrations are just marvelous, especially marvelous from an explanatory. The power of explanation is what I consider to be her real strength. Anyway, the analogy I want to draw here is that the use of the Dentalium broom is extremely similar to certain types of fishing, and especially harpooning sturgeon. And this illustration kind of captures it. Just like the Dentalium broom, you have a long rod with a series of extensions that can easily be attached to it as you push it down into the water. On the left, you see the business end, if you will, of that harpoon, which is 2 double-barbed harpoon heads, usually made out of slate or mussel shell, and they are detachable. Usually there's a little piece of, a little daub of pitch is put into that base of that harpoon, and then it's seated on the end, either end of those 2 wooden prongs. You'll note too that cordage is attached to each harpoon tip, so it can detach after it's hopefully wedged into a sturgeon. And then note too that the extensions, the preferred way of operating these extensions to the pole is with a scarf joint. And scarf joints, if you're a boatwright, you understand that is the primary joint that you use for joining 2 pieces of wood together, especially round cylindrical wood. Scarf joints are nothing but a simple bevel, and then the scarf joints on these particular poles, both for sturgeon fishing and, as we'll see, for the Dentalium broom. They have a little notch at the end just to make it a secure, strong joint. Then usually it's bound, it can be bound with cordage, or sometimes bone rings are made and slid down so that they fit and bind right at that scarf joint. So in essence, the way that this harpoon works, excuse me, in essence is that you've got several people in a canoe. The sturgeon fishery, perhaps the high point of it is at the mouth of the Fraser River. And so canoes would kind of position themselves, and their occupants would position themselves over beds that they expected sturgeon to be lurking in, and would try to gently probe the bottom of the river or the bottom of the seabed there with this. So it's a very precarious task. If you think about this, you've got to sit in a canoe or stand in a canoe that's in the water with the current running. And so you've got to keep this thing stable. You've got to keep it over where you hope there are sturgeon, and you have to balance yourself, and you have to gently probe the bottom so as to not disturb a sturgeon. Stewart talks about the use of feathers sometimes attached to the tips of this, just to create a more gentle brushing motion over these sturgeons, so you can kind of size up the size by kind of rubbing this harpoon over it. And then ultimately, you're going to jab that spear down into the sturgeon. The barbs will detach into the sturgeon. They usually kind of turn, and you play out that sturgeon. Or if it's something big, you probably are going to go for a short canoe ride. But the point here is simply that this is the same approach. It's a very similar approach to harvesting Dentalium shells. It's taking place from a canoe. You're manipulating the end of this Dentalium broom 30, 40, 50, upwards of 70 feet deep. And that means you don't get to see the harpoon. You don't get to see the Dentalium broom. There's a lot of guesswork and a lot of touch and feel all through the medium of that pole. And so it's, I guess what I'm trying to stress here not only is the analogy, but I'm also trying to stress the sophistication of the technology. There's a fine art here and a deep understanding of tides and currents, animal behavior, and operating all of this stuff in water. I have a tremendous respect for this particular type of technology. So let's look more closely at the types of Dentalium brooms that were in use. These are just a few. There are actually a number of other designs, but most of our knowledge comes either through ethnographic accounts and historic narratives, and only a handful of preserved Dentalium brooms, most of which are in the Royal British Columbia Museum. And then there is one specimen, I believe, at the Burke. So we're very limited in our information about these. I have to call out Andrew Barton, who did these illustrations. They come from his thesis, and it's a fantastic thesis. We encountered this as we were doing the research for the museum work at the Columbia River Maritime Museum. And I can't sing high enough praises. I think he's done a great job of background research, not only on the Dentalium brooms, but also on the various types of species. We've drawn heavily from his work, and I really can't say enough about the wonderful work he did there. It made our job much easier. Anyway, The first broom, which is on the left, I'll call your attention to, is perhaps the most simple. Consists of 4 slats, and those slats are usually made of cedar, but they can be made out of other woods as well. Kind of depends on the material, the wood materials that you have locally available. Those 4 slats wrap around and envelop a bundle of really thin rods or splints, if you will. And those splints can be made of cedar, yew wood, ocean spray, 9 bark. Again, it just depends on what's available. They're cut, trimmed, and shaped, and they're relatively thin and small. They range anywhere from, let's say, the diameter of your small finger to maybe half a centimeter, just kind of depends. They're all bundled together in a tight bundle, and then the whole affair is bound where it joins with the rod or the pole, I should say. Usually the rope is cedar bark, wound and twisted, and it works very well. You could see that those 4 slats project downward, and they are used to kind of secure the broom into the sediments. And then you're pushing, as I said, noted earlier, you're pushing those slats into the sediments in the hopes that Dentalium are there and that they get wedged into those tiny slender slats. The next style, very similar, although there's some minor changes. One, you notice that the slats, or not the slats, but the splints, the little thin splints actually protrude out beyond the length of the slats. And then secondly, and more importantly, is you'll see 2 weights attached to this. And this most likely is indicative of a broom that's being used at greater depths. If you think about it, most of this structure is wood, it's lightweight, and it can be buffeted around in water that has strong currents. So you can imagine that just controlling a broom like this, especially at greater depths, you need some way of weighting it down and making it kind of settle down as you try to manipulate it on the bottom, on the seabed. So the differences there are the attachment of the weights. The third style here comes in several iterations, and I'll show you one, a nice illustration of one here. But there is a plank now that goes all the way across with a hole in it and stone weights attached to it. More often than not, the stone weights are not suspended. They're usually attached to the top of the board. And the idea here seems to be that what's missing from this illustration is a rope attached to either side of this that would go up and be manipulated from the canoe. And the idea seems to be that by weighting that board down, you can actually lower it down and pinch the slats and the splints so that you lower this unit down, press it against the seabed, and it cinches tight and keeps it all bound together as you bring it back up to the surface. A fourth and final design, which I suspect may be a little bit more historic, but I don't know that. I really don't have a lot of proof for it, is more of a card design. So you have this square piece of wood that's stuck with a pole right in the middle, some weights attached, and then on the bottom of the board are again all these little wooden pegs that have been sharpened and densely packed on the bottom. And you can use it somewhat in a stamping motion, again, to kind of collect Dentalium. So let's look at some of these. These are from the Royal British Columbia Museum collection. This is that first style I was talking about. Very well preserved. These were collected, I believe, in the late 1890s, 1900s. And you can see a little bit of the details. Let's get in a little bit closer. These are the splints, the wooden splints that I was talking about. These are what are getting embedded into the sand. And you can see they're kind of tightly bundled there. And so these little small dentalium can kind of get pinched in and stuck and wedged there. That's really the underlying principle here, with the hopes that the whole affair, when pulled back up, will have an assortment of little dentalium trapped in those spines. Here's the second design with a couple of weights attached. Again, you can see the slats, the slats are yellow cedar, and the spines here, I'm not sure, but I believe they may be either yew or probably something smaller like an ocean spray or 9-bark. And they're cut and trimmed and bundled tightly together here. I should add that little ring of rope. If you're looking at the illustration on the far left, there's a little ring, kind of a donut ring. That's cedar bark rope. And for the smaller brooms, the more simple ones, the suspicion is that that's just a ring that's there to push the slats down, not while it's in the water, but when it's stored. The idea being you don't want it catching on things as you're moving it around. So you just slide that ring down. It has no weighting, and so there's no functional way that we know of to weight that ring and make it operate as some of the larger ones do. This is just a quick look at the design of the pole that is fixed to the broom itself. And one important note that kind of came out in our work making replicas was the realization that you just don't have a cutoff end. That taper is there for a reason. And the taper is to kind of interfinger with all of those little spines. And if you don't do that, then the whole affair kind of gets imbalanced because the spines move. Even though it's bound tightly, they will move a bit. And then it becomes off center and it becomes more difficult to manage. Something else for the archaeologists in the group is to take a look at those two rock weights attached on the right-hand side there. Those look like battered cobbles, which suggests that we have a wonderful example of lateral recycling, where stone tools have been repurposed and are being resurfaced in the context of now serving as ballast for these brooms. Just kind of an interesting note. This is from the National Geographic article. It was published in '93. And when I saw this back then, it was my first awareness that there was even such a thing. And it's just a fantastic article. And I have to share it with you because it's a great story. The gentleman by the name of Phil, I believe his name's pronounced Newton. He was a engineer, oceanographer, and did a lot of undersea work, diving, and the like. And somehow he became aware of this technology and was really fascinated and wanted to test it out. And he commissioned a gentleman by the name of John Livingston, who was a tribal carver, and he made the broom, which is what you see here in all three of these illustrations, one with all the little splints kind of poking out from the slats there. And on the left, they actually went to put it to use. And so as a diver, Newton kind of went down, photographed, and saw this in operation. And the design that they used is the one which does have the wooden bar with a hole in it that's designed to raise and lower the weights and press those slats in to kind of confine and keep that bundle of splints together with an eye towards keeping the dentalium shells trapped and then pulling it up, which you can kind of see in that small photo in the lower left-hand corner. The depth, I should add, that they're doing this is 70 feet. So just imagine the challenge of trying to take this whole affair and this long length of poles and work them and push them around. There's a lot of work here. This is, I want to kind of end on this. This is near completion, the broom that we did for the Maritime Museum. I think we ended up wrapping it not in cedar bark, but in cedar roots, split cedar roots, which worked very well. But it did highlight something, which is that this is a tool that probably required some maintenance. The fact that you've got all of this rope and binding around it and all of this bundle of splints, they're going to move around, they soak up water, they get soft. The whole affair probably moves a bit. And so likely once done and finished, it has to have at least some maintenance of adjusting and tightening ropes and making sure everything's there and making any necessary repairs if splints are broken. You can see that some work would need to go into that. I've done something that was done that John Livingston did with the Dentalium broom that he made. And that is, you'll notice all of the ends of the splints are kind of blackened. And what Livingston did was he kind of fire hardened them. And the thinking being that these will probably kind of be battered and abraded on the seafloor, and that might extend their durability. Now, when you look at the museum collections, the few specimens that we have, none of them have that hardening, fire hardening. They're all just kind of raw, exposed wood. I did something similar and kind of independently came to a similar conclusion that it probably would be good to harden those tips. I did something slightly different. We added tree pitch to the ends and heated that up. So it didn't harden the tips per se, like fire hardening, but what it did do was the tips absorbed the tree pitch and it kind of made them a little bit waterproof and also a little bit more durable, kind of like putting a plastic coating on the ends, if you think about it. But the point here is simply that these were, to our knowledge, this is something that does not occur in the ethnographic and historic specimens. So let me take a moment here. I've got to open the door to my room because I've got a dog that wants to out. So excuse me for but a moment. I'm going to let you out. There we go. How's that for an interlude?
Hey, Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can interrupt for a second. Earlier you had a picture of some Dentalium at the mouth of the Elwha River.
Oh, yeah. I don't know that I have that, but I saved that for the end because I would like to talk about that.
Oh, okay. Good. We have Vanessa here who sent me those pictures.
Oh, great.
Yeah, she'll have hopefully someday.
I think I've got them there. I wasn't sure whether I should
I don't
use
know.
them, we'll see.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Dale asked me to talk a bit about herring rakes because we did make a replica, and they're a fascinating piece of technology, and they're kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum of the Dentalium broom, in that the broom is kind of a complex contraption with all these different components and pieces. At the other end of the spectrum is an amazingly simple, easy, and very useful functional tool, which is a herring rake. And it's simple, and I've really enjoyed making these and researching their use. So if you're not familiar with them, and herring rakes are these really simple, long, usually cedar poles with a series of spikes and sharpened points, on one end. This allows you to sweep this through the water. And during a herring run, when you get these fish all kind of bunched up, you literally can just sweep this rake right through the water and hook on the spines a number of herring. So that the practice is one of kind of canoeing through a run and sweeping your rake through it and then tapping it back into the canoe to empty off the herring and continue to rake the water, pulling these herring out. It's an amazingly simple but very efficient tool. You can quickly, especially in the context of a run, gather and catch quite a bit of fish. I think Dale showed this earlier. This is Sam Johnson, former director. He just retired from the Columbia River Maritime Museum. Sam was very helpful and supportive of our work and had some we had a great working relationship with him and the staff there. They were very helpful in telling us what they wanted, what they were looking for in terms of the technology. And you can see kind of the business end of the rake, which is in prehistoric examples, the spines would usually be made of elk antler or bone, like metapodials, leg bones from deer or elk. And those would be cut out and roughed out into kind of a cylindrical shape and then pounded into the end of the rake. And so you're going to have to hand drill out, imagine drilling out with a stone drill, these little holes, usually spaced at 1 or 2 fingers apart. And then you hammer these roughed out pieces of bone or antler into the board and then sharpen them. And that's it. That's about all it takes. You do want to have a very distinctive kind of, if you will, aerodynamic shape to the rake. The thickest part is where the spines are all, and then the opposite side, it tapers very gently to a relatively thin piece of wood. That allows you to, that allows you to kind of manipulate the rake against the water with greater ease. Here's a close-up. This is a museum specimen. You can see this is in fact with bone. They've been hammered in and sharpened. And this is what they look like. On average, they're anywhere from 3 to upwards of 5 inches in length. The translucent ones here are bone. The white ones are antler. I can tell you that there were also some other materials. Bird bone is also the long bones of birds were also used on a number of herring rakes. So lots of different materials and wood, of course, certain woods, yew, ocean spray and the like, very hard and durable and easily sharpened, and likewise can be used as these sharpened spines for these rakes. One of the interesting things is in looking at technology, traditional technologies here in the West, are the changes that these technologies experience over time. With the introduction of new materials, metals especially, things change. The introduction of new materials allow a selection, if you will, and the adoption of new things. And this is Ed Carrier. Many of you should recognize him. And this is his herring rake. And as Dale mentioned earlier, notice the change in the spines. No longer do we see antler or bone spines. It's been replaced by a much easier material, in this case, stainless steel. But there is a little gap in there between this and the use of antler and bone We saw things like wire nails and even square nails in historic herring rakes were sharpened and pounded into the board as well. So it's a wonderful to kind of see this technology persist over time and still in use today despite the modifications. And finally, here's perhaps the latest and greatest in the high-tech version of a herring rake, which is these I'm finding are around, they circulate in various iterations. This is perhaps the fanciest one I've seen. This is out of Southern British Columbia, and it is an aluminum herring rake, which has a hinged joint and a slot to protect the spines. And so it's all made out of aluminum. You can see the weld up at where the long handle rod is welded to the bent aluminum shelf or a slot, which receives the aluminum spines when it's not in use. So again, a wonderful example of technology persisting. So with that, let me conclude with some final thoughts, because there are some things here that I think are really important. I've kind of hit on them with the herring rake, but I want to double back and talk a little bit more about these Dentalium brooms. They are, I think, and maybe I'm biased here, I think it's a remarkable piece of technology. I don't see the tools and equipment discussed much in the literature, perhaps in part because there's just not a lot of surviving specimens, and there are not a lot of ethnographic accounts that describe them in any detail. And some, in fact, are just completely wrong. They were speculative summaries of this technology. Even the use of the term broom is somewhat misleading, but I understand why it was applied. But it is a very appropriate use of local materials technology to do a very important job. And one of the things that I kind of, when we got into this, I kind of bristled at was that a couple of historic narratives and a couple of ethnographers or anthropologists too, kind of were dismissive of it. They kind of looked at this as kind of a contraption that was kind of cobbled together, and something that was almost kind of like a Rube Goldberg affair. And au contraire, this is a really sophisticated piece of technology. And as I hearken back to when I talked about the use of the sturgeon spear, it is analogous to the use of the broom. It's a very well-tested piece of technology. The materials are well understood and selected, and the construction and the design of the broom is very purposeful, and it works, and it has worked for a long time. And if you have doubt about that, you can measure its use by the wealth and the choice of Dentalium broom and the seeking out by people all over the Western US of wanting these Dentalium shells and wanting them for decorations, for clothing, for jewelry, and the like. This is the technology that created this abundance, and this is the technology that has served tribes very well here on the Northwest Coast. I'll button it up on that note and say, if you are at all interested in the topic, here are several references that I would highly recommend. Chief among them is, as I said earlier, Andrew Barton's thesis is just a wonderful document and a wealth of information. But any of these are good starting points. So with that, I guess let's see if we have it. I don't know. Oh shoot, I don't. And maybe Dale, we hand this off and have her talk about it ask Vanessa to maybe talk about it, but I understand that Vanessa is finding little tiny Dentalium now that the Elwha Dam is gone. They're finding the reestablishment of Dentalium there offshore.
Yeah, I would like to introduce her. This is Vanessa Castle. She's a member of the Lower Elwha tribe, and she's with the Natural Resources Department doing some amazing work all around when it comes to assessing how the removal of the dams affects the environment out with the Elwha. Vanessa, can we get you to say a few words about what you were finding, and thanks for coming in on short notice. Whoops. Vanessa, could you unmute your
Good evening, Iam Dunstan Ethnos Climus, and I am Vanessa Castle. And let's see, I am a member of the Lower Elwha Clam tribe, as he said, and work for Department of Natural Resources for the Lower Elwha, working half in fisheries and half in wildlife. And we're still making, weekly discoveries about different changes, and because the Elwha River system is so dynamic, and including the near shore to the Elwha, and we've seen massive changes to our near shore area that we're constantly finding new things that were either missed or that we didn't expect to happen, post dam removal, after 30 million cubic yards of sediment have flushed out of our river and deposited on our near shore. So that's exciting.
Yeah, have you found more? I mean, you sent a number of pictures.
No, and that was just something we're still waiting for confirmation that it is Dentalium. We found bits of shells that we hadn't seen before on the Elwha beach at a minus tide. It was a -2 feet tide. And so we have a group of people that are doing nearshore dives that are also looking out for different things like this that are culturally significant, because they have not previously been looking for certain things like that. They were looking for fish in the near shore. So we've been asking them now to look for Dentalium and other things that are culturally significant to us that may be taking hold and now the restabilized near shore of the Elwha.
Yeah, it would be good if, Dan made 2 of those brooms, one for himself. So he has some. Maybe he can get together, or you guys can get together at some point, or he could give this presentation at your library or out at the Lower Elwha.
Yeah, I'd love to bring it out and go hunting for some Dentalium.
Yeah.
It's funny because the fishing for ivory worms, it's still such a valued resource to us who are into the culture. Like, I'm wearing Dentalium earrings right now, and we're still seeking Dentalium on a regular basis because we still consider it a high status of wealth and like a huge part of our culture still in the Pacific Northwest. And part of the healing of our people and reclaiming who we are as Indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest is also getting back to those roots of like what we used to do, like things like this. And so it's beautiful to see that there are replicas being made, but also like for me as an Indigenous woman, I want to go try it. Like,
Yeah, I should point out Vanessa's community is at Pisht, which is down towards Clallam Bay CQ, and the tribe actually has sections of reservation in there. But thanks for joining us on that, and I'll be sure to get you connected with Dan. Anything else anybody wants to add on that? I know Mike Doherty's here, who's a leader in Clallam County and works a lot with the tribes out there. Thanks for coming in, Mike.
So Dale, can we stop? How would I turn off the PowerPoint presentation? and switch to.
Yeah, just hit stop sharing.
Oh, okay. There we go.
There you go.
Hey, so here is another replica Dentalium broom. Sorry, the screen isn't, I don't have the extra wide screen, but what I want you to see is this one's still is just about done and ready to be assembled. It's a rather long one. It is designed to consistent with the first one I showed you, which is very simple, 4 slats. And then what I want you to be able to see is the bundle of splints that rest inside. This has not been put together, but the splints can be either things like perhaps the most common one are cedar. These are just cut and shaped cedar rods. These are what the splints are. And you can see this particular case, they've been treated with pitch on the end. But other materials are also used too. So things like, these are just splines of, see if I can get it up here by the camera. This is ocean spray. I think I made reference to 9 bark, yew. There are a lot of hard brushy woods that can be used to make these splints. The slats commonly are cedar, although I wouldn't be surprised to see things like yew, which are much more durable material for making these. But it's, they're fascinating pieces of technology. And as I said, we just don't know a lot about these. And so one of the things that from my standpoint, and what's of interest to me is that making replicas oftentimes gives us a lot of insight into how and why certain materials or certain design elements are utilized. Sometimes you have to kind of play with the technology to understand not only how it works, but why certain materials are selected or why certain design elements appear or aren't used.
Add to that, Dan, we have a question from Selena Gray.
Oh, yeah.
Rope that was used to make the broom, could it have been sinew? And what are the materials in museum specimens?
Probably not sinew. One of the bigger problems with sinew is that it's soft when you put it in the water. So sinew is a great material for a lot of terrestrial technology, for like hunting implements for deer and big game and the like. Because you take those strands of sinew, soften them up, and then you wrap it around. It's like shrink wrap. You can wrap sinew around various things, and then it binds and tightens up. So you get an extremely good, secure hold using sinew. Arrows, a lot of arrowheads, spear points, and the like are all held to arrows and atlatl darts, for example, by sinew. However, when you put it in, especially seawater, it softens up immediately. So using sinew, you'd probably see the whole broom assembly just come apart and eventually float away.
Dan?
And second part of that question, what was that?
It was what was the material in museum specimens?
Much of the things I've referenced here, yew wood and cedar for the slats, and 9 bark, yew, ocean spray, and I'm missing one right now. But really any probably good hardwood could be used.
I mean, I think what she meant was, or he meant was, what was the rope made of?
Oh, I'm sorry. Cedar bark. Shredded cedar bark is shredded, and then the fibers are twisted into rope.
I see.
And you can twist it in really tight string-like strands or big, thick rope, depending upon how much you have and how tightly it's twisted.
Okay, we have one from Ian McKechnie from the University of Victoria, who worked with Liz and others on the woolly dogs and the program. But glad to see you, Ian. And he wants to know, do you know who in southern BC made the folding welded aluminum herring rake?
Great question. No, I don't. And I found that in a Google search, and it came up as a almost like kind of a Craigslist listing. And somebody just had a herring rake that they were putting up for sale. And by the time I saw it, it had already sold, which was a great disappointment to me because I wanted some examples of more contemporary use of this, you know, very traditional technology. But I've seen enough ads over this past year to kind of convince me that there's got to be a little cottage industry up there someplace where somebody's making these herring rakes, maybe not in large quantities, but I've seen several different styles using modern metals, you know, aluminum, steel, and the like. So it may be that there's a little or multiple cottage industries making those rakes today.
Other
Dan?
questions? Just unmute your mic and ask Dan.
Dan, this is Liz.
Right.
When I was researching the value of blankets, you know, dog wool blankets or mountain goat, and I kept coming across references for Dentalium and how much a blanket would cost, and like a fathom of Dentalium was a common measurement. But I came across one which I thought was interesting because you were talking about the tattoo for measuring. And in this quote, and this was from Ronald Olson, who was researching the quinault, and he said the unit of value was a string, which was slightly over a fathom in length. The string, he meant of Dentalium, was supposed to sag to a black dot tattooed on the middle of the chest. So there's another way that they were measuring them.
Interesting. No, I had not heard that.
Yeah, I can send you the reference.
I'd appreciate that. That's fascinating. Most of the references I've seen for tattooing, you know, as a measure, are Hoopa in Northern California, and I have not encountered that many in Washington. So I'm keenly interested in that. That's great. That's a
I'll send it to you.
Dan, David Mansell here.
Hi,
Is anyone harvesting Dentalia commercially today?
Oh, that's a great question. And I've been trying to find out. I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I've kind of hoped that somebody would be, but I don't know. And I don't even know very much about, I guess we need some natural resource folks to kind of tell us what the status of Dentalium is in its habitat. Is the population growing, or is pollution and other things having a negative impact on Dentalium? I really don't know, but that's a great question.
I've seen Dentalia available at a variety of trading posts, and it was all from India.
Yes, and I'm seeing the one thing I've noticed is it's very difficult now to get either of the species that are quite common here on the Northwest coast to be. It's difficult to purchase them, you know, at stores and the like. I mean, there's a lot of interest in Dentalium for modern jewelry making. A number of a lot of tribal folks want Dentalium today for powwows too. A lot of decorative dress work and clothing uses Dentalium. And so what I do see is a lot of international, I guess for lack of a better word, sources of Dentalium making its way and filling in that void today here in the United States and presumably Canada as well. So you get exotic species of Dentalium, which kind of sometimes stand out. There's some green Dentalium I've seen, which I think sources from the Philippines. And so, yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting to see how the exotics are becoming more exotic.
I have purchased Dentalium shells for use to decorate basketry, and they came from the New Zealand area.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that stuff is really traveling, isn't it?
I also saw them in the Solomon Islands on Guadalcanal, and a fellow there had helped a local person. She needed to get to fly someplace because her father was ill, and he lent her the price of a plane ticket. And when she got back, she gave him, it must have been 10 feet long and at least 6 or 8 inches wide of Dentalium. You would drape it around your neck and then down your front. And it was used for what they call a bride price. So you would pay the father in this Dentalium shells, incredible necklace or breastplate. And it's just beautiful. And so they were still in use in the Solomon Islands.
My goodness.
I think when you're talking about technologies that aren't really given much attention or credit, you just have to look what's going on in husbandry, even on the coast, and domesticating hair dogs, but also the looms. The looms are very involved. They're true looms. And like in Vanessa's area, the Paul Kane painting, and the ones we found 4 in one of the Ozette houses. That means a huge industry of double bar looms, true looms with shuttles. It's not a hanging loom like a Chinook, like a Chilcat blanket. It's made more or less a hanging loom with just basketry weave across it. These are true looms where the warp continues around. And another area, of course, is duck nets. We don't understand, but I know too in Vanessa's area, this Clallam and Suquamish, they used to put up these huge nettle fiber duck nets and knew how to catch hundreds of ducks at a time very quickly. Yeah. You had to have a party coming up or you just didn't do it. These kind of things just aren't recognized, but I think that's really just in our area, the true looms and the duck nets, and you're talking about Dentalium brooms. But it does seem like herring rakes are all along the coast.
Yes, and I kind of want to double back to the duck nets because I have a keen interest in those. And when you look at the size of some of those duck nets, they're widespread. I can't speak to the Canadian side of things, but I could certainly speak towards Puget Sound, and they're widespread throughout Puget Sound. They're just all over the place. They were. Where I live here in Tacoma, we have a site, a former site of a duck net. And there's some historic accounts of it describing its size and the poles still standing there. The one that has always impressed me was out, I believe it's at a place called Pole Island up in the San Juans. And they literally had a duck net that was stretched from one island to the mainland of the big island, I believe, of San Juan. So that thing was probably in excess of 200 to 300 feet at least, to say nothing of the effort it took to install that net and then operate it from between 2 islands, essentially, because they were situated wherever there was a good predictable flyway for like ducks and geese and the like, or a large pond where they would congregate. but the other point of this too is that you have to remember these are all woven, usually nettle, maybe dogbane is another plant that's commonly used, but let's say for the sake of conversation that nettle is being used to twine these duck nets. That's a tremendous amount of work and labor that just goes into one of those nets, which usually explains why they are so cared for, well taken care of, packed, and a lot of effort goes into their curation over time.
There's the Ed has made one fairly sizable one for your Astoria Museum, so you'll see one of the duck
Oh,
nets
great! I'm anxious to see that.
at the Astoria Museum. And,
What's interesting to me as a tribal member is that like all of these other things we talk about, like the looms and the duck nets, those are all used out of necessity to make the blankets and to harvest food. But the Dentalium brooms were for status and beauty and for fashion, essentially, and then eventually money, right?
Right.
So that it makes it different in our societal. It goes to show how our society changed over time from a necessity to survival to having, art and doing these other things because we had a large amount of time because we were so wealthy in our resources. So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and you hit on a really good point because and I can't speak to it because the record is somewhat silent on this, although I guess maybe some more research would maybe shed some light on this, but the antiquity of collecting Dentalium is kind of a fascinating topic here because we know a lot, well, most of what we know about these Dentalium brooms all comes from that contact period, roughly beginning around 1800. So we have a very limited time frame of understanding this technology. We know it's from this time period, but what is unanswered here is how far back, when did this how did this technology evolve on the Northwest coast? And one would think that perhaps the expansion and the increase in Dentalium, both geographically and in quantities, might tell us something and reflect that. I don't know. I'm just, I gotta believe that this technology has been in use for some time. Unfortunately.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is in the Marmas Rock Shelter in eastern Washington, they have an Olivella necklace, which is 8,000 years old.
Yes.
And the Olivella probably came somewhere in the Northwest coast. It could have been traded from California, but it may have come from as far as Nia Bay. At 8,000 years ago, 300 miles across the state.
Yes, and the oldest dates that I can find for Dentalium probably are at least 6,000 years ago in Southern California, in the Channel Islands, I believe. It's open to question as to what the technology was used to obtain those shells, but it was a sizable amount of Dentalium shells that were recovered. So some questions need to be answered in terms of what was the technology. Is it simply gathering a large quantity of shells from the beach, or are they already kind of developing tools and equipment to get into deeper waters?
other questions? I think, okay, we got some here. Pat has to leave, but Liz left you the reference for Olson.
Oh, great.
Page 86, you probably have Olson 1967
Yes,
on the Quinault.
I do.
Ronald Olson, the Quinault Indians. Go to page 86. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate that.
And I think too, like Vanessa said, this whole thing, when you look at it, wraps up into making wealth. Is important for certainly, you know, status and potlatching, and it's wrapped up in blankets. And there you go to your wool dogs again, and making blankets. You go to ducks for duck down blankets, like you were saying. So you don't want to mess up the duck skin. You want skin to be, and so you have blankets, but I saw a lot of Dentalium put into shawls and hat, you know, veils, and as if it's almost like wearing your wealth like a blanket. And no doubt they, you know, we see it at potlatching too, giving those as gifts. I mean, the necklaces and
Yeah, well, not just the Dentalium, but a lot of these exotic materials that aren't local, I think figure in, well, like Vanessa was saying, it's the acquisition and the display of wealth. We all, I mean, that's a very human trait throughout history. People enjoy decorating themselves. They enjoy having and possessing and displaying exotics. People signal that way with their clothing and with their adornment. And that has a very long antiquity in human history. And so Dentalium is but one of many. We even see it, if you think about it, I spent a lot of time with stone tools, and you see it in exotic stones. Well, the best example I can think of are Clovis caches. You know, when you look at those caches, some of them have just a remarkable array of stone types, and from great distances, not, you know, 20 or 50 miles, but hundreds of miles that stone has traveled before it ends up being placed in that cache. And so the stone, when you look at the stone being selected, it has all of these interesting qualities like color, texture, chatoyancy. It's amazing what people are collecting, and it goes way beyond just getting a good piece of stone to make a stone tool. People are collecting the mineral properties, the qualities and characteristics of stone. Quartz crystals, you know, they're translucent, they transmit light. Obsidian comes in a wide variety of colors and stripes and streaking. Some of these stones have kind of special properties, chatoyancy, you know, they're reflective. All of these things are being collected, and it's not just functional. Some of it is symbolic, and people do some really interesting things.
anything else? Anybody have another question? I wanted to thank Matt Barkley for helping to set this up and talking about his work too as our president. And but I'm not sure what Dave exactly means by this, but he says is decorated, in parentheses, engraced, common. Might have to.
Dentalium, I'll bet he's asking if the Dentalium shells are, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, if you're asking are Dentalium shells engraved or decorated, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
There's a great paper by Roderick Sprague, the late Roderick Sprague, on decorated Dentalium shells and the distribution of those throughout the plateau. And I think I showed a couple of the slides with trade strands that had very nice detailed decorations on some of those Dentalium.
We probably have time for one more if anybody has something they want to ask. Well, I sure want to thank everybody for coming in. It was a real good audience. And I definitely want to thank Dan for doing 8 different programs. They're always top notch. It's unbelievably
Thank
well
you all for sharing.
organized, and it takes, I mean, I know he works very hard to get to this, but thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you with Duncan McLaren from Canada on the work they're doing on those glacial ice sites up in central BC. So thanks everybody, and we'll be in touch. And we need to get you in touch with Vanessa so she can continue to
Yes.
see what you're doing on that. She came in, I have to say, like, I emailed her as you started. And she came in. I appreciate it, Vanessa. And anyway, I also want to say this is recorded. So Vanessa, you will get you the PNWAS YouTube channel so you can see this and the one on the woolly dogs.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Well, thanks again, and I have your address now, so I'll send you some stuff.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us this evening, and thank you, Liz, for the reference. I appreciate that. I'll run that down.
Yeah. Well, have a good evening, and we'll see you in a few months.
Okay. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.